So I just watched The Invisible Man by Blumhouse, and let's talk about it.
Let me help you.
You can't help me. Surprise.
So a little backstory first. Ever since the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, every other major production studio has been looking in their junk drawers for properties that they have that they can make a shared universe out of. DC definitely had all the necessary components, but they just did a botched rush job with it. And unfortunately, rather than learning from their mistake, Universal has just followed in DC's footsteps. You see, The Mummy was supposed to kick off the whole shebang and then lead to a follow-up Invisible Man with Johnny Depp. But after being such a critical failure, the studio decided to put the whole dark universe idea on hold. After going back to the drawing board, what they've decided to do is to kind of abandon the whole shared universe idea and just do their movies onesie-twosie for all of these monsters. But most importantly, on the cheap. So they hired Blumhouse. And honestly, fiscally, this makes a lot of sense because they can basically guarantee a return on investment because that's the only thing Blumhouse is good at. And this allows them to keep making these movies to hopefully kind of work their way into a position where the audience wants a shared universe and they don't have to go bankrupt in the meantime. So how was the movie? Well, it sucked, but generally not as hard as I thought it would. The Invisible Man is about a woman who has a super genius, evil, husband who figures out how to turn invisible so that he can terrorize her. But if The Boy 2 Electric Boogaloo felt like a paint-by-numbers movie where everyone just showed up to do the bare minimum and say that they did their job, then this movie feels like it has the exact same cynicism at the foundational level, but the artist who actually had to make the movie kinda gave a shit. The truth is some effort was actually put into polishing this turd, and I'm not sure a whole lot of other people could have done much better with that same script. It's like when your kids make you breakfast in bed, but the pancakes are undercooked and they decided to put salt in the coffee instead of sugar, but you still give them a lot of points because they really tried. The difficulty is that the turd in this instance is the writing, and so it's the framework for the rest of the movie to hang on. The biggest sin this movie commits is making me unfavorably compare it against Hollow Man. You see, in the first act of Hollow Man, they establish that there's a scientific team who's working for the military on an invisibility project. They first do animal testing on a monkey, which shows that the serum itself seems to kind of make you go, maybe not insane, but at least it seems to really stress out your brain. And then finally, Kevin Bacon's character decides to push for human testing, which we've seen in movies before. Rise of the Planet of the Apes, Splice. But this setup is great because it answers a lot of questions. How were they able to pay for it? It was a military contract. How did he discover invisibility? There was an entire team of scientists working on it together. Then who was the victim pool? Those scientists. Why did he go violently insane? Well, the serum seems to make you go crazy, and they rushed right into human testing. The initial setup actually does just that. It sets it up so that it doesn't have to beg you later to just not think about it. And now to contrast with The Invisible Man. How does he pay for it? I guess he was just already rich. How does he discover invisibility? He's just so smart by himself, he doesn't even need a team. So then who's in the victim pool? Well, mostly people that we have to introduce later in the movie. Why, is he violently insane? I guess he just was always violently insane. The lazy writing also hurts probably the best thing the movie has going for it, which is just the performance of Elizabeth Moss as Cecilia. And much like Joker, the movie really hangs on the shoulders of the performance of the lead character. And Elizabeth Moss conveys broken and tired extremely well on screen. Unfortunately, she's also written to just be kind of dumb. Listen to this point by Robert Downey Jr.
Remember Warren Beatty, who I learned so many amazing things from. I was doing a movie called The Pickup Artist with Molly Ringwald. He taught me a lot about just acting and what it was, and he said, what's your action in this scene? And I was like, oh no, he's asking me. I was like, my action, I'm picking up girls. He goes, what's your action in this scene? And I was like, I'm driving a car. And he goes, no, your action is you're trying to go to work, but you're getting distracted by this addiction you have to trying to get laid. So your action is you're trying to get to work. And I was like, oh yeah, he's right. And he said, always know what your action is, because then when you come in the morning confident, or when you come in the morning and you can't hit your ass with both hands, you know what to do.
So Cecilia's action is getting help from others while not sounding insane, which is a great trap. She's being antagonized by an invisible man. It's a real head scratcher. But Cecilia constantly goes against her action by acting as insane as she possibly can. And she would know that this is her predicament. She would have the sensibility to convey her message in a way that doesn't obviously make her sound crazy. Because even if she knows that there's an invisible man, she knows that no one else is going to believe that right off the bat. So to get more to that point, the rest of this video is going to be spoilers. So at some point early in the movie, the Invisible Man takes pictures on his phone of her and her friend's daughter while they're sleeping in bed. He then leaves that phone up in the attic for her to find later to creep her out. The problem is that she does find that phone, and she should have instantly realized that this is amazing evidence for her to go turn into like the police or her friend. Because at minimum, the photos on that phone prove that someone broke into the house and took pictures of them while they're sleeping. She obviously couldn't have just faked that. And it also happened to be her husband's phone. But instead they write her to just drop the phone at some point and then go on a mission to search for clues. Scene placement and editing in general are kind of a nightmare in this movie as well. After her husband dies, she's informed that she's to receive $100,000 per month for the next 4 years. Then later that week, she goes for a job interview after she just found out that she's like very rich. Also, the movie has some meta commentary on the boss being sleazy during the interview that like goes nowhere. But you could say, well, hey, Chad, maybe she just didn't think that the money was legit, and so she still wanted to get a job, so she had like a backup. But I would say nay, because she goes and opens up an account for her friend's daughter so that she can go to school, and she's going to give her $10,000 a month, and she even tells her all of this. So she obviously was really anticipating that money coming in. Just move that scene to after the job interview. And speaking of the daughter, there's a scene where she's talking to Cecilia, trying to console her because she's sad, and then the Invisible Man smacks her in the face, but she could clearly see that it wasn't Cecilia who smacked her in the face. And then she goes and tells her dad that Cecilia hit her. And now, for Chad rewrites the scene. What should have happened is that the dad walks into the room, he sees the two, he smiles, and then he goes and walks away, and then he hears the loud slap sound. He rushes back into the room, and then all he can see is Elizabeth Moss and his daughter, so she must have hit his daughter. So he grabs her and rushes her away, and Elizabeth Moss has to go and try to explain, no, it wasn't me, it was the Invisible Man.
No, it wasn't me. It was the one-armed man.
Boom. Now no one in the scene has to seem R-worded. Speaking of which, the villain of the movie is probably the most R-worded. His motivations are nothing short of just mustache twirly evil. Like that's his character design. And while he could be using this newfound power to go and like do regime changes with governments and assassinations and have untold riches and basically rule the world, instead he uses it to go and play hijinks on his wife. A motivation pops up about halfway through the movie where Cecilia finds out that she's pregnant, but then everything before that just seems ridiculous with him. They should have established the pregnancy in the beginning of the movie. That even could have been the inciting incident. She finds out that she's pregnant, now she wants to get away from this guy. You know, it wasn't enough for her to leave for herself, but now she has someone else that she has to worry about. And again, editing-wise, one of the things I wish they did better throughout basically the whole first half of the movie is slowly ramp up the tension. All of the pieces are there, but they're in a really dumb order, which makes me think that maybe this was like rewrites or producer stepping in and saying, hey, we're on page 15, nothing super exciting's happened yet, let's have a fight scene. Entirely too early in the movie, a way that he tries to freak her out is stand on a sheet that she's trying to pull away. So at that point right then, the jig is up. She knows that there's an invisible man who's trying to attack her. But then in following scenes, he does little poltergeist kind of things where he ends up writing a mean email to her sister, and he hides her sketchbooks before she goes to her job interview. And now, for Chad re-edits the movie. I would have kept the initial spooks the same, you know, hearing a noise maybe, and then turning up the burner while she walks away. But then the following spook should have been the writing of the email and the hiding the sketchbooks, and then hitting the friend's daughter in the face. If we do it in that kind of order, then the audience never really has a great example of him really existing, and so we could have been kind of gaslit as well to be like, ooh, maybe she is just kind of going crazy because of all the PTSD, and she's doing this all herself and kind of like dissociating and, you know, creating this kind of alternate, ex-husband who's doing it instead of her. But we know what's going on before even she does, and so there's just no tension because the whole time you're like, yeah, it's the invisible guy. Another scene that could have been a great gradual ramp in intensity but ended up turning into a dumb action scene is that attic scene. She gets the feeling that he's standing on the ladder that she used to get into the attic, and so she dumps paint on him. Why the lid was open, I don't know. And this is a great, good, kind of scary scene, which is the first time that we get to like see him, and it would have been so much better if he had just run out of the house after that. It would have been a natural progression of escalation with interacting with the guy, and also because it's that you can go and clean paint off of yourself in a kitchen sink in like 2 seconds or at all. Plus, we establish later in the film that there's multiple invisible suits. Just to have him go home and change. Plus, if you can cover him in paint and then you can see him, then he would always be walking around covered in like this light, kind of grimy, dusty, human outline look. He would have like disgusting feet marks walking around on the ground because it would get so dirty. Everyone would see that. Fuck this movie. Till next time. It can feel sometimes like we're plagued with reboots, remakes, and sequels. Surely it wasn't always like this. But when did it start? And will it be like this forever? Well, to get into that, let's talk about something called the 20-year cycle. We see it in all forms of art: fashion, music, movies.
Hello.